I'd like to welcome our keynote speaker today, who is actually a role model from Plug and Play itself. It is our COO, Candace Widdoes, and she is here to share her own journey and her own growth within Plug and Play. Now, please welcome to the stage, Candace.
Thank you, Alice, and really fantastic job. It's so wonderful to see everyone here. I thought I would give just a little bit of a background on who I am. I am originally from Colorado. I moved here to California about 12 years ago, and prior to working at Plug and Play, I actually worked in the financial industry. At the time when I graduated college in the early 2000s, the economy was artificially propped up by the real estate market. It was just on fire. And I worked for Pulte Homes. They couldn't build homes fast enough. I worked in their loan department. I worked at Old Mutual, a mutual fund company, and at Charles Schwab. And I just remember in the mid-2000s, 05, 06, 07, coming into the office, and there were screens all over the place, you know, blasting news about the market. And every day it was just down, down, down. And it was pretty depressing. And I knew that the financial industry was not a great place for me to be. It was early in my career, and for personal reasons, my now husband actually lived in California, so I thought, oh, you know, maybe I'll move to San Francisco, and worst case, I'm in San Francisco. And so I made the journey here to California back in 2007, and I got the first job I could at a telecom company, and Plug and Play was actually my biggest client. And so I was sitting downstairs in the lobby waiting to take the head of IT out to lunch, and Saeed Amidi, our CEO, walks by, and he looks at me and he's like, "Who are you?" And I said, "I'm Candace. You know, I've been working with your IT team for the past 6 months in your data center." And he said, "Oh, talk to so-and-so. We're hiring." And so by the end of the day, I had a job offer, and I was off to the races. And at the time, we had about 20 employees. And everyone was really just focused on filling this building with startups. We were a real estate company. And to catch you up, Saeed, for the prior 30, 35 years, had really built, he and his family had built a whole conglomerate of businesses, from plastics and packaging to bottled water, commercial real estate, Persian rugs. And I have to say, in terms of role models, it's been really it's been incredible to have a role model like Saeed Amidi, our CEO. And for those of you who are not familiar with Plug and Play, we are an early stage investor and accelerator. And the story actually begins in the 1990s when Saeed had a building in Palo Alto where he was the landlord to Google and Logitech and PayPal. They had some early success in investing where they would really put together what we call a collaborative due diligence platform. They were not experts in technology, but they figured it out. They would come across a startup, and they would see that fire in their eye, and they could tell that they could execute. I love the story about Andy Rubin with Danger, who later went on to create Android, and that he spent 5 hours negotiating over a Persian rug with Saeed's father. And at the end of the negotiation, Saeed's father said, "We need to invest in that man's company." And so the family put the first $400,000 into Danger, which was later acquired by Microsoft for $500 million. And so, you know, we've had a lot of good successes, and the way we would do it is that we would lean on people who knew more about that particular technology than we did. And so when I started at Plug and Play, I was the first corporate-facing person, and I worked with our COO at the time to bridge the gap between corporations and startups. And back then, we had companies like Microsoft knocking on our door wanting to promote their software to startups, or Sun Microsystems, when they existed, wanting to sell servers to startups. And so we would do events. And it was 2008. I started with Plug and Play in June. In September, I remember driving to work at 7 o'clock in the morning and hearing the news that Lehman Brothers was dissolving. And it was just, the sky was falling. And it was eerie. You know, I remember I would drive from San Francisco to Sunnyvale, and the roads were empty. There was no traffic on 101. And it was a really crazy time. And I have to say, it's so interesting because some of the best startups have come out of recessions. You know, Google came out of the tech bubble burst in the early 2000s. And I have to say, Plug and Play in our business today is very much a startup that emerged out of a recession. You know, back then, I knew the financial industry wasn't a place I could go, and here at Plug and Play, our product wasn't really well defined. I wasn't selling startup leases or leasing cubicles. I wasn't investing in startups. I was focused on corporations, and I had to figure it out, figure out some sort of product. And what I love about working here is that we're given a lot of creative freedom. We're always allowed to just have an event to bring people together to figure out how to create value. And Saeed supports that, but at the same time, we're really incentivized to figure out a way to create value on top of what already existed. And what already existed was an audience of startups. So in this building, we have about 410 startups that we could promote a corporation to. And so we would host events. And when we would do events, I did everything from start to finish. If I'd sold something to PayPal where I promised them that I would promote their API to university students, well, I had to find every university student that we've ever met and every professor and figure out how to get an audience in this room. And I would put together the brochure in PowerPoint, and I would drive to the printers and pick it up. And I would get one of my colleagues who happened to be into film to handle the AV, and it was a very scrappy setup, but it was fun and it was exhilarating, and it's so wonderful to see Jocelyn here in the front audience because she and I actually collaborated on a smart grid event, and this was years and years ago, and so it's been really wonderful to be in a place where I've had the freedom to really build a business on top of a business, and what that business is the corporate part of our business. And so we have this real estate business, we have these startups, and we have these university relationships. We bring in startups, we invest in them. What do we do with corporations? And what we observed beginning in 2008, 2009 is that corporations were flocking to Silicon Valley in droves. To quote the CEO of Accenture, he notes that digital is the main reason just over half the companies on the Fortune 500 have disappeared since 2000. All these companies are terrified of becoming extinct. To paraphrase another CEO of Lufthansa, he says, Lufthansa and Uber are in the same business. We get people from point A to point B. Lufthansa's worth $6 billion, Uber's worth $60 billion. What am I doing wrong? And so all of these corporations were coming to Silicon Valley to figure out how can they create value in the same way? How can they evolve themselves to handle this digital transformation that was happening? And so we experimented with a lot of different business models where we would do events, and then we would host the corporations for deal flow sessions, and we realized, okay, that was a product. We could provide the service to corporations of finding startups of strategic interest to them for partnerships, for joint development, for licensing, strategic investment, acquisition. And we realized for the startups, money's a bit of a commodity. You can raise money from anybody, but if you can say, I'm running a joint pilot with Ford or with Procter & Gamble, that's a game changer. It's a lot easier to raise money if you have a major corporation validating your technology. And so eventually what we began to do was to organize ourselves into topics. And so today we actually cover 14 different industrial verticals. And we did this model where we would work individually with the corporation, but the problem we ran into is that the corporations sometimes didn't know what to do with startups, and they were slow. And so when this happened, when we started to organize into topics and combine corporations together in the same room, today we've got about 220 corporations, this is when we exploded. This is when the corporations could look over their shoulder and they could learn from each other. And sometimes when you meet a startup, you bring it internally and say, hey, this can save you tons of time, tons of money. The business units don't pay attention. They say, hey, IBM does the same thing. Why should we take a risk in working with a startup that could be out of business next year? And so if that same corporate scout could go internally and say, hey, this startup can save you tons of money and time, and by the way, our competitors are working with them, and our customers are looking for this solution, it turns the heads. It makes it so that the startup's ability to engage with those corporations happens much faster and much smoother. And we really love the cross-pollination that happens where a startup who may have a horizontal technology can test out industries. They may try out, I was just, this morning in our morning meeting, we went over case studies, and there's this company called OmniScience, and we've made something like, it's a predictive analytics platform that We've made something like 750 introductions, unbelievable, across 7 different industries. And they found the most traction in fintech and insurtech. So as a result, they're really molding their company into a fintech and insurtech application. And so it's really amazing to have so much impact on these startups as a result of this model. We really believe that innovation should be open to anyone, anywhere. I think something like 75% of all venture capital went to California and New York. A sad statistic is that 10% went to women-led companies, 90% went to men. But what we really want to do is open it up. You know, Silicon Valley is very much a meeting place for startups to come from all over the world here. I'll never forget a Munich-based startup pitched to a group of BMW executives, and the startup said, I could never get this meeting in Munich. You know, all parties had to come to Silicon Valley just to connect with each other. And so what if we can create this platform where we've built our business over creating a soft landing for corporations and startups and investors to access the resources that are unique to Silicon Valley? What if we can spread that globally? So today we're in 24 locations worldwide. We're in 3 locations in the United States, 7 in Europe. We're in 8 locations in China. We just launched Tokyo, and we have Singapore and Jakarta. And so our mission, Abu Dhabi, is really to enable a startup to hop from location to location and access the resources that are unique to each market, and bundle corporations, you know, where we actually get in deeply with the headquarters. So it could be Daimler in Stuttgart, where a startup can really meaningfully engage with many areas. So we are in the business of finding diamonds in the rough. This is what we do. And I don't wish this business on my worst enemy. The accelerator business model is awful. That's why you see a lot of accelerators kind of pop up and disappear. And that was the big challenge that we had. You know, everyone in our company really was under a lot of stress to create value, to create a business. And so we really, you know, have worked to create a very well-balanced business model where, you know, if we can find a startup of strategic interest to a corporation, well, that's a good investment opportunity for us. Startups do not pay for what we do to be accepted into our programs. They don't have to give up equity. We do invest in about 200, 250 startups per year, but we negotiate those investment terms on a case-by-case basis. You know, our thought is, hey, go through our program. If you find value in what we do, let us put some money into your company. So the corporations pay us a membership fee. That's how we remain sustainable. That's how we keep the lights on. We do not accept a startup unless a corporation has raised their hand and said, yes, we can do a pilot or proof of concept with them. So the startups that are accepted get some sort of engagement and benefit from the program. And Plug and Play has just this amazing platform where we can make our own investment decisions based on an amazing amount of intel that we get from all these transactions that we facilitate. And so, you know, it's so interesting. When I started, I had a very, my boss had a very big personality, if I can put it one way. And I found myself leaning on him too much as a crutch. You know, every little question I had, I would get up and ask him. And I remember after 2 years, he actually left the company. And I remember sitting at my desk, and my instinct was to get up and ask a question, you know, about a negotiation in closing a corporate contract. And he wasn't there anymore. And I remember sitting at my desk thinking, okay, I have to use my brain. I have to think. And one of the ways, a really pivotal point in my career is when that happened. And, you know, so I really had to think, okay, what would I do if I were in charge? You know, and honestly, as an employee, it's easy to look up at your managers and think, they're stupid. You know, if I was in charge, I would do things so much more differently. And when my boss was gone, suddenly I had to think, oh my goodness, how would I solve these problems? And when I actually put my mind into trying to think, oh, how would I solve these problems, I realized how difficult it is. And something I've told people that I work with often is that we all sit in prisons, but something that we don't realize is that the door is actually unlocked. And there's always a solution to a problem. And I hate to say this, but I definitely was in a victim mindset in some cases. And the second I didn't have that crutch, then I had to really use my brain and work through that. So that was really something that was impactful for me. And what I found that is if you think like a leader, eventually you will find yourself among them. Now the problem is that ideas are a dime a dozen. You know, if you go to a manager and say, I've got this great idea that can solve the world's problems, you may expect them to write a job description for you and create a wonderful salary for you. And in my own experience, I've learned that that doesn't work either. So if you think like a leader and you can execute, then you will find yourself among them. And so it's really crucial to act in the role that you want to be initially. You know, really prove your capacity. And you know, that's definitely what I did in my own experience. Something that also became clear in my experiences are the opportunities are everywhere, and they present themselves daily. And I think in terms of a hook, I don't know why I have this visual perception of hooks, but every single day, whether it's an investment opportunity or a job opportunity or the ability to close an account, hooks are there. And I think of them in terms of maybe bringing a client into Plug and Play or a partner, or maybe a hook will pull me into a new world, like when I went from Colorado to California. And one of those pivotal moments in my own career is, it was about 6 years ago. I received an email from my partner at NTT, which was the telecom from Japan. And at the time, our president, his name was Candace, and my name was Candace. And the guy at NTT sent an email to Candace, but accidentally put my email in the subject, the thing. There he is, Tom. Tom with NTT. And he invited Candace to come speak at an event in Tokyo. And so I took, and I was so excited when I saw the email, because initially I thought it was addressed to me. and so I took the email to Candace and out that he was actually planning to go to China at that time. And so he said, why don't you go, you know? And I was so excited, you know, to seize this opportunity, and it was terrifying. I was 29 years old, you know, I'd never really spent much time traveling for business or even much less out of the country. For someone who looks like me to walk in to these major multinational Japanese businesses. So I set about setting meetings with a dozen companies. It was incredible, and I remember tromping around in the rain, waiting to go into Canada, into Sony, et cetera. And if I were selling widgets, I wouldn't be allowed into these companies, but the fact that I was selling Silicon Valley was really impactful and really incredible. And from this trip, I ended up building a relationship with Panasonic in addition to NTT, and later on, we ended up starting our retail program. So the retail program was the first themed program that we'd started, and the hardest client to get is the first one. And the fact that that trip yielded this relationship with Panasonic, Panasonic was then our first client in the retail program. And once you have that first partner, it's so much easier to get more partners. And now we're at 220, and we continue to grow. And so just the fact that I had the privilege of having that hook presented to me, and I grabbed it, and it happened, was really incredible. And so it's so important to keep those, keep that in mind. Stay positive, always look for opportunities, because they are all around us. And a last note, in terms of showing capacity, I just really want to give a hand to the FoundHER team. So let's give a hand. This was not something that I mandated, that our CEO mandated. This is a movement, if you will, that was organically grown. Some people that were really passionate about this topic have come together, have stepped away, you know, in addition to their normal job duties, they've stepped away to do something like this and to seize this opportunity. And the fact that they've done this shows enhanced capacity, so that when I look for leaders, because we're growing so quickly, the fact that they've done this is really incredible. So For those women, entrepreneurs, for those women, just everybody, look for opportunities where you can show your capacity, and you will be rewarded, at least in my experience. So with that, I will welcome Alice back on the stage to get the agenda going.